Welcome back. Welcome to part 2 of reinventing your relationship with time. And I promised in part 1, I would go through what I'm planning to take with me from last year to this year, what I'm planning to leave behind, and then what I'm planning to create new. So I'm going to read through that list briefly, but before I do, recap here from part 1. If you haven't watched that or listened to that, please go back to the very first episode in this series. It's a 3-part series because it will give you context. As a refresher, we discuss the difference between bandwidth and capacity. Bandwidth is our 24 hours in a day. It's finite. Capacity is our infinite potential. And this is us flying as high as we can. We can literally unlock more potential in our genetic code if we do certain things. And we can't be tapped with our bandwidth. We're just totally maxed out, which I know you all know what that feels like, because that traps us with our capacity and we're boxed in. Okay, so head back to that episode if this is news to you, because you want to get that first. Now, today we're going to talk about tactics, additional ways that you can manage and really optimize bandwidth, but increase capacity, right? And so when we think of this, it's really 2 parts. It's mindset and it's action. And I mean micro actions, like stacking those small actions that compound over time and then create huge shifts, right? So that's momentum. That's what we want. First, I'm going to go through a few things on this list of mine and talk about ways that I'm actually tackling those using the tactics that I've learned over the course of time to really fly higher. Because reminder, when we're at capacity, this is what we're uniquely qualified to do, right? This is what we're on planet Earth for, and this is our zone of genius, as Dr. Gay Hendricks calls it. But when we're up there, kind of like an airplane, we are more efficient. When an airplane's at altitude, it requires less fuel. It was created and designed to be up there. And so that's similar to us. We want to fly as high as we can, and there is no ceiling, right? Now, when we think of that, though, we also know there are certain indicators that will tell us if we're on the right path up or if we're kind of shaking and trapping ourselves because we're tapped at bandwidth. So there are tactics and there are indicators that we'll talk about today. Okay, so I'm going to read you a few specific things that I'm applying against this concept and these tangible tips. So things I'm taking from last year into this year: 100% accountability and ownership for the reality I create. Prioritizing intentional time with my son. So I have blocked in my time budget. So head back to the first podcast episode in the series if you don't know what that means, because it's so critical and important to have a time budget that we reconcile. I have, when I'm picking Lincoln up, dropping him off, playtime, it is blocked, right? No fly zones. And so it may be 2:30 p.m. in the middle of a workday. In fact, it is 2 days a week, where from that point until 5 p.m., nothing can be scheduled, right? That is my time. And what's cool is I get to see the percentages of this, and at the end of the month, get to go and reconcile against, is that true to fit into what I designed my ideal day to look like? Okay, but I digress. Okay, what else? I'm taking with me my Ruthless Red pen. We'll talk about that more today. And continued reinvention with my relationship with time and money. So that means setting ruthless priorities. And that will reflect how I want to feel in my day. That's a biggie. Time budgeting and reconciling, we talked about. We tend to overestimate our bandwidth, our 24 hours in a day, and underestimate our capacity, our potential. So keeping an eye out for that. Less meetings, more movement. So really looking at every single meeting and scrutinizing, does this make sense? Is it required? And what I did is at the beginning of the year is I cleared every standing meeting. And so far, just a couple have made their way back. Many of the meetings that used to be perceived as critical and important, they are now voice notes. their exchanges with that counterpart or with that audience, those stakeholders that were in that meeting. And we're able to provide updates as needed on demand versus blocking time on a calendar. So this means scheduling deep work, systemizing communications. We'll talk about that in a minute. Time boxing, task batching, huge. When we change gears from task to task, whether that's in our homes doing one thing to another or in a work environment, we lose so much optimization in terms of having to have our brains shift and go to that next thing. The percentages and the science behind this is just incredible. So it is not effective to be multitasking. That's the point there. For me, a bandwidth bankrupter, alcohol, absolutely does not have a role in my life whatsoever. Regardless of your relationship with alcohol, it is probably pretty accurate to say we can have more margin in our day, more time, period, when it's removed or when it's decreased. So for me, I'm taking that with me. We can do a whole podcast episode on relationship with alcohol if you'd like, but we'll save that for another day. That's a biggie. More dancing. So that means dancing in studio, on stage for keynotes, but also in the kitchen with Lincoln. Literally, this is something we do almost daily. We love to dance together. It's fun. Okay, what am I leaving behind last year? Unconscious use of time and money. Just not thinking about it, right? Which means we have to become real friends with data and reality in order to be able to shift and identify where unconscious time and money is being spent. Leaving behind an obnoxious amount of screen time. So on your phone, you can look at where you're spending your time. We'll talk about this in a minute. Also, marathon Zoom back-to-back days and meetings. It's not how I like to operate. It's not a good look for me. Scrolling down that rabbit hole on social media. Total bandwidth bankrupter. Overriding my intuition. That's a tricky one. That's life work. But when we are onto it, it starts becoming more and more a part of our awareness. And then outsourcing judgment. They're not judgment in terms of I'm judging you or I'm judging a thing, but my personal judgment. That's something that I think we can easily slip into as we, have more people around us, or if we're doing something new, and there's still no one that has more data of your specific scenario than you. So we have to at least take that into play. It doesn't mean don't listen to other people, but make sure we're checking in, because our GPS is going to have the most relevant data to our situation. And then uncontrolled inbound communication, text, email, DMs, Slacks, voice notes, biggie. And that is a huge bandwidth bankrupter. Back-to-back work travel trips, avoid these to the best of my ability. It always seems like it might be an efficient thing to go from this city to the city real quick and get back, but I just don't like how that feels. And it actually, not only does it feel draining and physically doing it, but in my experience, unless it makes a ton of sense, but it's a perceived drain before it even happens, because I'm already dreading the multiple cities. Something I'm doing away with unless it absolutely makes sense. And I'm willing to say yes to something that means I'm saying no to something else, right? Cost benefit analysis. And then waking up early and earlier is not a strategy. So getting rid of that. And that is one of my defaults. I will fit as much as possible into a day if you let me just, run wild, but because there's so much I want to do and so much I'm excited to do. And that's not a bad thing, but that's also draining my capacity. And, there's a point of diminishing returns, of course, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Anything is possible, everything is not, as we like to say. Playing whack-a-mole goals. So when you have too much going on and you're moving a millimeter in a million directions, then you end up seeing these spurts of growth, and then it stalls and over here, and it's dizzying, right? And it drives everyone around you crazy. Having a resentful edge and overwhelmed state of hurry. So when we're tapped at that bandwidth and we're just rushing, some of the indicators are, always feeling behind, always feeling late, never feeling prepared, feeling like you're doing all these things, but nothing's getting 100% of your ability or attention. And that resentful edge, like, I am ready to shed that. And by the way, 100% accountability. I created this, right? If I'm feeling that, that is my doing, and I need to take ownership first and foremost. Chasing balance. I'm not a believer in balance. However, just because balance is BS doesn't mean we can have boundaries. And these aren't just boundaries with other people, other things. It's also boundaries with ourselves. So big into that. And think of it as like, there might be times where certain aspects of life are louder or needing more attention, but they can't stay there necessarily. Otherwise, something else is really going to sacrifice over the course of time. Rushing. It's really your nervous system. We're not designed to be at that bandwidth, rushing, kind of over scheduled type of operating system. All right. So, and then also a false kind of self-imposed obligation to do things. So these are things that I haven't even committed to that potentially I've done or I've been doing because I've felt obligated. Okay. That's my problem if I'm doing that. And if we're not going to take the wheel and, actually make some changes, then we're going to feel it because that's taking away from our potential. Okay, so those are the things I'm shedding. What am I going to create in the new year or in this new season? If you're not listening at the beginning of the new year, that's okay. You can apply this tomorrow. A new season can start any minute of any day and any day of the year. So more compassion. So when I'm at bandwidth and I box myself in, I'm all of a sudden not as compassionate as I'd like, not as empathetic. Like all those emotional intelligence tools that are pretty innate, they just start to fall off and it's not a good look, right? So more of that, saying no more. No is a full sentence. If you need backup, it's no, I have another commitment. And maybe that commitment is you. And maybe it's reading a book or just sitting down or doing nothing, but that is a commitment. Recommitting to myself and my health, and really life is a renegade. So this isn't new to me, this kind of operating system. However, I've definitely slipped over time and I'll find myself needing to re-engage in the daily practice. So that commitment, it could be recommitment every single day, and that's cool. Day stacking, huge. So I love to think super big, right? But then we need to reverse engineer and take that first best brave step. What does that look like? And what is the consistency in action day over day that will compound to get us to up there? That is awesome because when we reverse engineer like that, it becomes accessible. It becomes, I could do that today. And then you get to the next day, oh, I could do that today again. And that momentum is huge. When we push ourselves across the starting line, we feel different, right? And when we feel a perceived progress, which is one of the ingredients of happiness scientifically, that starts to build and that inertia just gains. It's so exciting, right? So that's where we want to go. Real quick, okay, better sleep. So I want to become like a sleep Olympian. I'm tracking my sleep. It's a big deal. It's all the way from habits to accountability. And really, there's a lot out there in terms of better sleep. Releasing the next Renegade book. So excited about this. It is so close. And I am not going to send that thing to print until I feel it is ready to go. And it will be released under the Renegade imprint. The first piece of the first published piece under the imprint where Renegades are printing their books. So excited about Renegade books. I'm going to be incorporating tumbling into my keynote speech. So this is a biggie that I'm creating new. It's bringing a next level performance to that stage, and just, it really lights me up. I talk a lot about where passion, purpose, and skill collide, that Venn diagram, right? You've got 3 big circles. And if you're listening and you're not watching, I'm using my hands here to show the Venn diagram. Well, in the middle of where passion, purpose, and skill collide, bliss resides, impact resides, income resides. This is joy, this is health, this is capacity, right? For me, movement, dance, a lot of people would be like, you're gonna mix that passion of yours into your business? And I'm like, absolutely. Why wouldn't I? Why not now, right? Because it's going to just, I think, elevate everything in me. I'm excited about it. It keeps me challenged, so on and so forth. So why not, right? I love doing things when people from the outside looking in kind of have a tilt head and say, I can't believe she just did that. And I love helping people do the same. And it's not for the sake of just having them say that. It's because they're thinking, hey, well, what could I do? Because it's inspiring, right? It's motivating to go figure out what's in that intersection for you. Okay. Running for fun and peace of mind. Running for fun and peace of mind, not pace, not distance, not pace, not time. And I used to run a lot. I enjoy it. It's a mental just heaven for me, like utopia. So when I start to calculate too much and get too much into that was a good run, that wasn't a good run, that wasn't long enough, then it takes a lot of the joy out. And so a lot of Renegades are running the Austin Marathon, February 17th, 18th weekend. So if you happen to be, please let me know. And then a couple more and then I'm done. More space to learn new things. So what I learned last year, and you heard this in the first of the series, this podcast series, that the light bulb came on about bandwidth versus capacity when I was learning something new and I realized how energized I was, how free I felt, how challenged and excited and just fulfilled. That's capacity, right? So that requires space. It requires space for me. That means listening to new podcasts. It means mini classes maybe to learn about something. Learning from experts around me. That takes time and space, but it also is very important to me. And perceived freedom, huge importance. I value very, very high, as well as learning, just consistently learning. Finishing an exam that I'm studying for, a big exam. That's just literally a box to check. And then I would like to create a plan for how I can get my pilot's license in the next year. I'm going to add, or maybe 2, but I would like to get it here within the next, from now, 24 months at least. So that means by the end of this year, I better have a really clear plan. It doesn't mean I have to have it, but that's just capacity planning. Okay, so that's my list. Well, that's great, right? But now what? How do we execute on these goals, right? How we want to feel, and how we can find the fuel to get there. So if you've done that exercise, by the way, this is, I think, my 15th year maybe of doing this exercise, maybe a little less. Actually, I think it's around 11. Every New Year's Eve I do that. I make a list of what I want to take with me in the new year, leave behind, and create new. And then when the clock strikes midnight, you can rip it up and use it as confetti. You can burn it or whatever. Just take a picture of it first. So go through that process if you'd like and see what you come up with, right? All right, so how do we execute against this? I'm going to share a couple of specifics and then also a few specifics that are signals that you're on the right path of optimizing, managing that bandwidth, and then increasing your capacity, expanding that infinite no ceiling zone. Okay, so I mentioned bandwidth kind of bankruptors. And in the last episode, you heard some of the first things that I did to get that kind of renegade, ruthless red pen out and start removing things, what can go. And these aren't just like literal tasks in a day, that too, but also you look at where your time's being spent, you look at who you're spending your time with, you look at where your money's being spent too, which is in the next episode. We'll talk about your relationship with money because it really does impact time. And so this ruthless red pen, what does this even mean? And it's not just, oh, I'm going to strike everybody from my life. And no, it's about being really resourceful versus looking for more resources per se, right? We want to be as smart as possible. So for me, it means what am I going to circle and what am I going to strike? And there have been a few big things this year that I had to weigh and say, hey, am I going to continue this or not? And they weren't easy decisions, but after enough data and analysis and reconciling on the time budget, it's like, no, that needs to go, or it needs to be paused, or it needs to be outsourced. And so let's look at some more bandwidth bankruptors. In the first episode, I mentioned one of the quickest drains and this bucket of like noise traps, gossip, assuming things, and kind of ruminating and just dwelling on things that you can't control, that likely have nothing to do with you, and you have no indication that they're going to happen anyway. So that is a daily practice. That's not something you do once, right? So that is easy to at least start identifying and shifting. When we do that, we become known for that, and then people bring less of those situations to us in terms of maybe wanting to talk about someone else or talk about assuming something that's going to happen that there's no indication that's true. That's just unnecessary stress. So my aunt used to say, don't let anything rent space in your head for free. My Aunt Kathy, and she was an entrepreneur and she was such a renegade. And it's so true. We only have a certain amount of space up here, right? Time, energy, mental space, mental energy. And so be a good landlord. What are you going to allow up there? Inbound communication has been a big part of my challenge with bandwidth. I call it like shaking, right? When you can't even think about the next thing because you're so always right here and you can't pick your head up and look up. And so one of the things that I've done, and I did this a long time ago, but I've kind of dialed it up even more, notifications. I don't really get any notifications that ding on my computer. I don't even get text notifications on my home screen. I have to go into my text to see my texts. And this is a biggie because I have found it is so easy for me to get distracted. Email, Slack, text messages, DMs, whatever it is, that it can derail deep work time. And that's like my precious time where I'm doing the things I'm uniquely qualified to do. So inbound communication is huge. Closing tabs. It's almost like when you close tabs on your computer, I think about it as like tabs in your mind, right? That is energy and that is taking up space and bandwidth, even though you don't intend for it to. So it's like an open tab in your mind as well as on your computer that's just kind of taking up energy. It's like a leak where it's just a slow leak. There's a pull there, and similar to if you haven't closed the loop on something with someone, big or small, like you want to close that out, close your tabs, close the loops, right? So distractions, mental, physical, and digital, we really want to look at those. And physical for me means my space. It needs to be clean and clear. I love a very clean desk. I'm just kind of that organized person that if I have sticky notes everywhere or I have a lot of clutter or something, it's draining to me. It's pulling. I like wide open spaces. It helps me think bigger and be open-minded. So look at your space. I don't know about you, but when I get stressed, I just start cleaning because I have control over that, at least, whatever I'm stressed about. I may not, but it gives me a sense of, okay. So we want to think about all those distractions and cleaning and clearing those up. When it comes to looking at meetings, because meetings are a big kind of time suck or energy drain, asking yourself a few key questions. Am I required in this meeting? Will I add value? Will I deliver value? How many people are in the meeting? So if there are more than 5 people or so in a meeting, it's very likely that there's redundancy or there's inefficiency. And so when we look around and decide, okay, is everyone really necessary? Unless it's an update meeting, and in that case, could it be a video instead, right? A one-way video versus all these people having time to schedule, which takes time, the back and forth, then attending, and then any follow-up. So really kind of revisiting meetings, the length of time. Do we need a 30-minute meeting? Do we need an hour meeting? Very few meetings, in my opinion, should take an hour. And then regardless, try 50 minutes or 25 minutes versus, or maybe even 15, versus getting yourself where you're back to back to back. So when we're back to back with these marathon, especially Zoom meetings, because that requires a whole nother layer and level of just psychological presence and energy, we can drain ourselves so quickly. And that's when we start rushing and we start getting behind. And then all of a sudden one meeting is behind the next. So when we give ourselves room for error, or just room to take a break and a breath, fill your water, reset, do something, go outside, it just changes our whole state. And we're not in that rush, shaking at bandwidth. For meetings, also asking yourself, could this be a voice note, of course? Could this be a walking meeting? And agree potentially with the person on the other end who's attending the meeting, especially if it's virtual. Hey, do you want to do walk and talk? If it's in person, walking meetings are amazing as well. When we move, and this isn't my opinion, you can look at the science, you can Google image, view of your brain when you've been sitting for 20 minutes versus walking 20 minutes, and you'll see side by side crazy differences in how stimulated and how different it looks from actually in our brain when you're engaging in those different types of ways, if you're in movement versus just sitting there. So we're so much more effective. Looking at does every meeting need to be on camera? Probably not, because that's also how we plan and predict our schedule and how we block things. Do we need to be at a desk in front of something? And it just gives us more flexibility and freedom when we don't, but indicating to the other person if it's on camera or not. Not everything needs a Zoom link or needs to be, Microsoft Teams. And you could say in the title of that calendar invite, no cameras necessary, or not on camera, or cameras required, so on and so forth. No agenda, no meeting. Unless you're meeting someone to catch up, and in that case, you might look at that as a signal of, do I genuinely just want to see and hear how this person is doing, which is great. But what are you saying no to if you're doing that, right? If we took every coffee, hey, can I pick your brain request and invite, we would likely be at bandwidth and not really thinking through from an offense perspective, that capacity of where do we want to spend our time. And yes, that might be something that's extremely fulfilling to you, but at what volume and what frequency and at what cost, right? And are there other ways to tackle it? So when people reach out to me and say, hey, I take you to coffee and pick your brain, usually if I want to engage and help this person, which usually I would, right? I will respond with something they could do first, and or ask if they had a very specific scenario that maybe I could voice note them some thoughts versus getting in a car and going to coffee, right? And that's not every case, but sometimes it's like, hey, read this first or listen to this podcast episode, or have you tried this? And then when you do, we can take it to the next step. But it also makes them take action, and you can show their level of true desire and commitment to follow through. Okay, so those are a few tips on meetings. I want to talk about the 3 S's. So these are big bankruptcy, like bandwidth bankruptcy KPIs. Sleep, lack of sleep, it's just it's going to be a big bandwidth, just like tapper, right? Because we aren't able to function as efficiently, of course, and be as optimized. But we're unable to emotionally regulate as well when we don't have as much sleep and rest. And when we are unable to do that, we're likely going to create more unintentional drama or things that we wouldn't typically do and emotionally regulate like we would. So sleep, screen time, and spirits. For me, that the last one, I mean, if you're finding you're at bandwidth, but you're also finding that you're having several glasses of wine every night, and or it's become a thing where you just know you would have more margin in your day if you eliminated or at least decreased, check that box. That's an easy first experiment. Screen time's huge. And I track that, and I like to see it going in the direction that I want it to go. Because I'm the first to admit sometimes that mindless just scrolling down the rabbit hole, we think it feels good, but it's feeding nothing, right? It's not feeding my soul. It's definitely not feeding my 24 hours in a day. It's taking it up. So those are some of the things that I look at if I'm starting to notice, okay, I'm not feeling like I'm operating at capacity, or at least increasing capacity. Okay. When we look at signals of things working or not working, and we'll wrap it up here, here are some things that you can look at. How well you're dealing with potentially stressful situations, that self-regulation, that reaction. If you feel like you are just kind of cool as a cucumber and you're just rocking and rolling, even though things around you are going like this, that's a great indicator that you're not at bandwidth. You actually have some space, and you're likely operating at a higher capacity. You're flying higher. It's like flying above the turbulence, right? And up there, one of the reasons we want to remove all the distractions, back to the plane analogy, is that we can't have any collisions up there, right? So we need to remove anything that could cause danger, and that is too much going on. We don't need any kind of self-inflicted turbulence. So cleaning and clearing that space. So another indicator, there's a concept called the upper limit problem. And this was coined by Dr. Ye Hendricks, once again, who's genius, and he created the zone of genius concept too. He's been on this podcast. And what that means, an upper limit problem, is when we rain on our own parade because we're increasing in our capacity and flying higher, and it's uncomfortable, so we think we need to just bring ourselves back down to safety, what we're used to. And so this is so common. It can happen in big ways. We call it ulping, right? Upper limit problem. And you can catch yourself, you can catch your friends, your fellow renegades, your fellow like-minded individuals who are growing. And it is so common, but it's something to look out for. So if you feel yourself ulping, that's actually a good sign that you are growing and you're uncomfortable in a good way. Other indicators of, we're not at capacity. You're never at capacity because you could always go further, but we're increasing and expanding our capacity. Indicators would be, you just have this sense of, this may be uncomfortable, but I feel like I was born to do this, right? Things feel lighter, even though they might be difficult, challenging things intellectually. You're just up-leveling the people around you. You're attracting people who can help you or who want what you have. It's just, all of these indicators are really good signals when you find yourself lifting. And if you're not sure if you are, look for those things, right? You're stretching. You feel stretched, but you don't feel so stressed that you're going to break. Like you can bend more. So those are great signals. Feeling lighter. Also catching yourself say, oh, I get to do this versus I have to do this, even though it might be something challenging, right? So when I find myself using that language, even outside of work, I have to XYZ. Ooh, red flag. What's going on here? Of course, as humans, we will always need to do some things that we don't necessarily want to do. But more and more, you will be able to find ways to shift that and prevent or avoid that if you're paying attention and you start operating more at capacity. So from I have to I get to. I don't have a to-do list. I have a get-to-do list. And by the way, in terms of overwhelm and just managing potential burnout, overwhelm, I have 2 lists. I have my get-to-do list. Yeah, it might be long. But I also have my to-do today list. And this has been for years I've practiced this, because if I look at my to-do list, it could be extremely overwhelming. But my to-do today list, if it fits on a 3x3 sticky note, like Post-it note, I'm usually okay. But if it's longer than that and you can't use mouse type because that's cheating, then you've probably tried to pack too much in, and now you've overestimated your bandwidth, and you've likely underestimated your capacity. And that's a calculation. You're setting yourself up to be boxed in. Okay, so those are some of the indicators. We're going to wrap this episode up. I'd love your feedback. Thank you for all the responses to the first episode. This is my second solo podcast in a long, long time. And so it feels good to be back in touch. I want to hear what you're thinking, what questions you have, what additional ideas you might have, and hit me up. And make sure to subscribe to my newsletter, because that's where additional resources are going to be delivered, will continue to be delivered. And if you aren't getting that already, please sign up. You can head to amyjomartin.com. So that concludes today's kind of next step. And next time we will dive even deeper. I'll touch on your relationship with money and reinventing that. There's a direct correlation in my experience with time. And then back to that ruthless red pen, how we can apply that to that money situation and get a little bit more into the mentality, which is basically insurance for taking action. All right, so we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching or for listening.